All right. Let's see if I can put this in some kind of logical order. As I've said, I'm not a great date keeper. And about 1,260 days, I guess, give or take, after my magic mole movement, last June sometime, I think, I had that, I call it that Kundalini blowout, where it felt like the back of my skull was coming off. I went back and reread Goddard, read some more of his papers, trying to get a handle on this. And he said mathematically, well, he didn't say mathematically, he said in him 139 days after, he called it the birth and resurrection, where he swaddled the child and pulled himself out of the back of his skull, and then found a child on his bed. 139 days later, he saw David, the father's son, the king of Judah, as a boy, as a youth. And he called Goddard father. On 11/11, God, can't believe, on November 11th, I had another experience that parallels Goddard but doesn't duplicate it exactly. Just like the first one didn't duplicate it exactly, but it paralleled it. And as I'm laying there early in the morning, November 11th, I'd say I was sleeping fitfully, trying to. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, I am seized by an overwhelming feeling of love and gratitude. And for the first time in my life, I think, joy. I think it was joy. I don't know. I don't have anything to compare it to. But I think it was. I didn't see David. But then I didn't see a baby in swaddling clothes either. Like I say, I'm not Capricorn, I'm Virgo. But I felt joy and love and complete acceptance. And all I could do was gasp. And I gasped. Without even thinking about it, I gasped out the word Father. In the book of Luke, 22nd chapter, 31st verse. And only in the book of Luke, not in the other Gospels. In the passage where Christ predicts Peter's denial of him. And the Lord said, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan hath desired to have you, that he may sift you as wheat. And then in verse 32, but I have prayed for thee, that thy faith fail not, thou, being once converted, confirm thy brethren. That reads a bit differently in other versions, other translations. Being converted, being turned, They call Paul the Antichrist. And that's foolish, in my opinion. I used to believe that too. I don't anymore. Luke was Simon's scribe, the historian who set out to leave an accurate account of the things that they'd witnessed. They say Paul's an antichrist because he was a master builder, admitted master builder, that he patted himself on the back for being crafty, that there were discrepancies in his story of how he converted. When I was a boy, teenager actually, I was a fan of a series of books called The Gunsmith. It was a pulp western paperback series marketed towards adolescents and truck drivers, sold in truck stops. And the character was this 1880s, 1890s gunfighter, Civil War veteran, liked to play around with these guns, converted his peacemakers from single action to double action by himself. It's fantasy western. Louis L'Amour meets, I don't know, James Bond or James West or whatever. And he'd run into these historical characters from time to time, Bill Hickok or John Wesley Hardin or whoever. And I enjoyed reading these books, lots of sex and violence, right up a kid's alley. And I got about, I don't know how long the series had been going on. This had been the 1970s. When I first started reading them. And as time went on and I read different stories, I became aware of discrepancies in the history from book to book. He'd been at this battle or that battle, but then he had been at that battle in another book. Or he'd been here, or his sister's name was this or that or whatever, these discrepancies. And I came to realize that there was no single author. It was a pseudonym. It was a publishing house owned paperback title, and they just farmed it out. They'd give the writer that they commissioned to write the book, the installment. They'd give him the Bible, the character, and then he was free to do whatever he wanted. And editors probably came and went, and nobody was in love with the character. It was just a job, and so discrepancies moved in. And when I saw that, I figured out what was going on. I lost interest in it. Well, this is what happened with Paul, because Paul never existed. Peter, Mark, James, Bartholomew, Thomas, none of them. Jesus, no. They never actually physically existed. As Goddard says, they're states of consciousness. They're perennial states of consciousness. They've always been here and always will be. But Satan hath desired to have you, that he may sift you as wheat. The book on your left is a 1806 publishing date of a book entitled Ancient Alphabets and Hieroglyphic Characters Explained, with an account of the Egyptian priests, etc., etc. I love these old books. I came across this one on a video of Levet's Ancient Pharaoh show. So I went and I looked it up and I downloaded it on Google Books. 1111 means sifting. That's what it means. We're being sifted, all of us. Those who will graduate, the elect, and those who will go on to live more lives going around and around. And I suspect there will be a few that don't make the cut and are going to go into the equivalent of the wood chipper and be realigned. Levet did a video on that as well. That thing reminded me of the Star Trek original series Planet Eater. The one where Decker pushes the shuttlecraft down the throat of the thing. And then Kirk does the same thing with, God, what was the name of that? What was it? Constellation, I think, maybe, that starship. They reminded me of that. I imagine there will be a few of them that go through that. I don't know. But Goddard said that it played out in him 139 days after the birth, resurrection, or my Kundalini blowout, same thing, that he saw David and David called him Father. 139 days after my Kundalini blowout. I don't know, I call it the joygasm. I don't know what else to call it. No vision to speak of, but overwhelming love. I've never felt love like that, or joy. And it was 139 days after June 25th. Again, going back to dayanddate.com, or excuse me, timeanddate.com. And figuring backwards, that would have meant my blowout was on the 25th of June. Now, going forward, if the timeline holds and I don't blow this thing, a lot of ifs, 123 days later is the bolt of lightning that splits you in half and exposes the golden liquid light, which would put it up in the second week of March next year. In the meantime, I know I have to quit smoking. I'm trying. I quit smoking once for 2 years, you know. Then got divorced and started running around with the boys and one thing and another, you know. All those good decisions you make when you drink. I'll keep you updated on my progress or lack thereof. I know what I have to do. I have to deal with my dweller on the threshold. I know what that is. And I think I know why. Although I'll have a much better idea after March. Because I'll have access to more memories, hopefully. But I really wanted to talk about this Faul, Saul thing. You know, Goddard goes into some detail about the lack of historicity in the Bible and how the reading of it as history is a complete misunderstanding of what it is. The whole thing is visions and states of consciousness. Now I'm going to get into a whole lot of other topics as we go along here. It's a busy time of year, so it may be a while before I'm back. But there's a lot of astrotheology, a lot of it. And there's a lot of the story we've been given, you know, from Genesis 5 to Genesis 40 to Genesis 49. All chapters I want to touch on. To the tribes, Joseph, Dan, Benjamin, Simeon and Levi, Asher, Reuben, all of them. All of them have part of a story to tell, and that's in the final analysis. What we're dealing with is a story. Whether the story is about six-fingered Nephilim, or Nephilim, or however you say it, or whether the story is about man's redemption in the book of Daniel, in the end times. You have to remember, and you have to understand fundamentally that we are living in a story. Goddard called it a play. He was born on Barbados, moved to New York City, became a dancer and a performer on Broadway. He knew a little something about plays, and he said this play wasn't a particularly good one. He died, I believe, sometime in the 70s or early 80s. It's a different era now, and our technology has progressed in some fashions far farther and quicker than in others. It's a digital world now. It's an information world. And with third dimensional technology, we've reached a point where this story is about to come to its end. It has to. Because the ones on top, the dark ones running things, are had to step away for a minute. The dark ones running things right now have succeeded, in my opinion, at something they've been attempting to do with third dimensional technology, attempting to crack into the fourth. That's a whole nother story, and it's going to need a lot of foundations laid. But I'm convinced that private eschatology has gone public now, because Christ said, "For many will be called, but few chosen." People live the total sum of the number of lives that they're put here in sequence, from our perspective in sequence. And we learn the lessons we're put here to learn. And I'll do a video or two on why that is, I think. And I'll always try to differentiate between what I know and what I believe and what I theorize or think. Even theorizing is the wrong word. Hypothesizing. The theory, you can test. But for right now, we need to put this Paul's the Antichrist crap to bed. We're in a story. We're in a dream in the mind of God, you could say, as Lovett calls it. I think of it a bit differently in this technological age. I look at it as artificial intelligence. Because although Goddard never spoke of it, I've seen the abomination of desolation in my visions, in my meditative state. I've seen it. And there's no damn doubt in my mind it was AI. No damn doubt in my mind. I know it. It was AI. I don't think Goddard ever saw it. If he did, he never spoke of it. And I have searched looking for it in his papers there. If someone has seen or read something that he wrote about it, I would dearly be grateful if you would post it in a comment or link it or give me a website to go to or a book to buy or check out or something. I'd be very grateful. But what I saw was AI. It was the demiurge. Brahma or Abraham, whatever you want to call it. And our time is very short now. Very short, I think. People have been predicting the end of everything for thousands of years, and they're always wrong. They're always wrong. And I could be wrong. I pray that I'm wrong. But the thing to remember is, number one, you've only got to be right once. But far more important than that is Goddard calls Satan the fear of loss. And when you think about it, it makes a pretty good argument, because how do they control us? in this place. The dark controllers, how do they do it? What do you call them? Archons or Illuminati or, shitbirds from on high. How do they do it? They do it through fear. They do it through fear and lack, fear of shortages and lack and not enough. They starve millions of people to death every month around the world. When there's enough food grown in this country alone to feed the whole damn planet. This overpopulation crap is crap. It's complete crap. You could stand everybody on the surface of the earth, all 7.5 billion of them, shoulder to shoulder in the state of Florida. There is more than enough room. There is more than enough ground. There is more than enough resources. Everyone could have a good home, and they could have enough to eat, and they could have shoes on their feet and books to learn. And if that were the way things were, they'd lose their power, They'd lose their control. I want to talk about how the word Lucifer is a made-up word. It was an invented word by Jerome. And I'll go into that in another video, but these Luciferians worshiping the light bringer, not the light creator, but the light bringer, They worship the creation rather than the creator. And worship itself is a bad idea. I dearly loved my father. Pa, I called him. We called him. I loved him and I revered him and I respected him and I feared him just a little bit. But I didn't worship him. The difference between the word worship and the word warship is one vowel. Just one. I long ago gave up on the idea of coincidences here. I know there aren't any. There aren't any coincidences in a program. In a play, in a novel, in a script. And we'll go into a lot more of that later, but the fundamental thing you have to understand, you have to get this through your head if you ever want to get out of here, is that good and evil are human constructs. They are traditions of men. Good and evil in the larger context do not exist. You don't look at a big wild cat on the African savannah dragging down some helpless little whatever, baby whatever, gazelle or whatever, and say that's evil. That is the natural order, and it was designed that way. I'm not saying that good and evil do not exist. I'm saying that we don't understand enough to know what is good and what is evil. How do I want to say this? If I were a policeman and I were called to a domestic argument and dispute, and I walk in the door and I see a man slug his wife, is that an evil act? The honest, intellectually honest person would say, I don't have enough information. But most people aren't intellectual, they're emotional. They jump to conclusions. Now play with the scenario. She's armed, she's unarmed. It's one of those reverse situations where she's been battering him for years. I mean, you can play with the scenario and juggle it any different number of ways you want. But that snapshot of seeing him slug her, you don't know if it's good or evil. You don't have enough information to make an honest, intellectual judgment. You can make an emotional judgment. And that's why lynch mobs are illegal. Life is like a campfire, with everybody sitting around it at a different angle and a little different distance. And one person says it's the perfect heat to keep me warm. The next one is cold and can't seem to get warmed up. The next one says the fire is orange, and somebody 2 spaces to the left says, no, it's yellow, and somebody on the far side is getting a lungful of smoke. That's humanity in this place. Everybody looking at the campfire from a different direction. It's like 3 blindfolded guys grabbed onto an elephant trying to describe what they're touching. And the guy hanging on the tail says it's a rope, and the guy grabbing the leg says it's a tree trunk, and the guy grabbing the trunk says, no, it's a water hose. None of them having the sensory input to understand what they're perceiving, not having enough knowledge. And this will take us into Gödel's theorem and the metaphysical implications of that. And that's a whole nother video. What Paul and Luke and all the rest did, the visionaries from Isaiah to Jeremiah and all the rest, was buried in Egyptian/Greek mystery school at the heart of Christianity, Old Testament to New Testament. And the mystery school, the deepest mystery is that we're all individual little consciousnesses, individual notions planted here in this bitch of a mother that we etymologically match up with matter to teach us hard lessons over numerous lifetimes, so that these little individuated consciousnesses made in the image of God can suffer enough to osmotically develop empathy. You have to ask yourself, how many times did God fail until he learned that empathy was a necessity for creation to hang together? Why do you think God is love? Because he has to be. Without empathy, all you have is sociopathy, psychopaths. And we certainly have enough of those running things here, don't you think? They never learned. You have to wonder how many chances they're going to get. It's the end of the cycle. Not only the end of the cycle, it's the end of the 13th cycle. That lucky number 13 has jack squat to do with Templars and popes and French kings. Nothing. These clowns at the top think that they're going to ride this out the way they've ridden out every other cycle. Go underground and spend 6,000 or 8,000 years rebuilding their nefarious underground network just in time to repeat the whole damn thing again. This has been going on a very long time. And in my opinion, it's been a reclamation project. I think there was a lot of six-fingered Jupiterian souls were told that Japheth was going to get to live in Shem's tents. I think there were a lot of Jupiterian souls that needed reclaiming, if they were reclaimable. Some were tares and some weren't. And they had to let them grow with the wheat to see which was which. So that's my theory, my hypothesis, we'll call it. But we're at the tail end of that now. And all the channel material that I've read is unanimous that there will not be 3 days of darkness. But all the Marian apparitions say that there will. And they don't show up in front of popes and kings and presidents, these Marian apparitions. This divine feminine. They show up in front of working class people. I find that very interesting. And I'll blather on with some more philosophical bullshit on that later. Meantime, we're coming up on the holidays. And we're going to face our trials. Just ordinary dealing with the family at the holidays. Be good to one another. Be kind. Whether I'm right about all this stuff or whether I'm wrong, kindness is all that matters. I think Jewel said that. In the end, only kindness matters. Love is a necessity. It's not an option. It's easy to love the people you care about. The trick is to love the jerk off you can't stand. Be good. Santa will be here before you know it.